Hi everybody, hope you're doing marvelously well. About a year or two ago, I was looking for some really good advice on jazz guitar playing. And I scoured the internet, and there's tons of information all over the place. And then I happened upon this gentleman here, Mr. Jens Larsen. Jens, how are you?
Good, great. Thanks for having me visit your channel.
I've got to say, your channel is, I don't think there's a better jazz guitar channel out there. I watch a video and you jam about 2 hours worth of information into about 15 minutes. I'm sure everybody says the same thing to you. And I'll go to another channel and I'll watch an hour of something that should be 10 minutes. And with you, it's the other way around. It's like so much powerful information. Just absolutely incredible stuff. So it's a privilege to have you on here. But you did start off as a rock player, didn't you? Like a rock blues player who got into jazz.
Yeah, I think by now, I mean, anybody my age would probably not have started with jazz because, I mean, we grow up and from me, like listen to the radio, watch television, and well, it's not a lot of jazz music, so you start something else. So for me, I think actually where I came from mostly was sort of this mix of like blues with Stevie Ray Vaughan, Hendrix, and of course because of my age, also like Pearl Jam and Soundgarden and those kind of things. And then from there, gradually, I think through the blues, I sort of became interested in jazz, mostly just because I was interested in improvising. I figured out that when I was playing music with other people and creating something in the moment, that was the most fun part of it. So that was kind of what I wanted to explore more and more. And then I found out that there was this music where everything was improvised almost, which I could listen to, but I didn't get any of it. And then I had to figure out how that worked.
So what we've done, or what you've done for us here, is you've created a top 10 list of jazz guitarists that have influenced you. So at number one, you have, I suppose, arguably the godfather of jazz guitar himself, Mr. Charlie Christian.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if you have to start somewhere and you have to mention somebody, you kind of have to mention the first guy who sort of really started to use electric guitar, and also who just pretty much just fathered everybody immediately after him. Everybody was just coming out of that, and also pretty much out of a few recordings from him, because he was the guitar player with Benny Goodman, the clarinet player. And of course, that was at the time a huge star. So he got a lot of exposure, and he had especially one feature called Solo Flight. And I think with the other guys in the list, most of them probably knew Solo Flight by heart. That was just sort of the piece that everybody had to learn. So it was like, well, not Smoke on the Water, but I don't know, some really famous solo that everybody knows. That's what that is, really.
Now, at number two, you have Jim Hall.
Yeah, Jim Hall. So in a way, I'm kind of skipping up a little bit, and that's because I'm, of course, biased by what I listen to and who I like. And I think Jim Hall is one of the early ones that I really got into, mostly just because coming out of the bebop era, then everybody was playing long lines and lots of notes. And Jim Hall was always playing a little bit fewer notes, but he was just rhythmically so interesting and also very melodic and really swinging, iron strong time. The guy, you can set your clock to his timing. It's amazing. So for that, I think that's definitely one of the greatest jazz guitar players we ever had.
Number 3 is a personal favorite of mine. Hard not to be Mr. Wes Montgomery.
Yeah, of course. I mean, Wes is what's then considered, I think, by most people, the most important jazz guitar player, and really also the biggest influence on everybody. I don't think that there are anybody later on the list that didn't check him out. Mostly famous for, I think actually what he did is that he managed to not only play hardcore jazz music and be a very good hard bop player, but he also actually managed to cross over into more popular music. So in the later part of his career, you'll find him playing with a string orchestra, playing pop tunes, playing Beatles tunes, and there are, I think, there's also a recording of him appearing on TV. I forget what. I think he's playing a Beatles tune there, but at least it's a pop tune. Playing a lot of that, and at the same time managing to be a fantastic jazz musician. Really tons of groove, lots of arpeggios. Of course, the octaves, that's like his signature thing, and also chord solos, which also was, I think he was sort of one of the first to really bring to the game there.
So number 4, Mr. Pat Martino.
Yes, of course, Pat Martino is really just one of the first prodigies on jazz guitar. I think the first record from him he made when he was 22. I'm not entirely sure. And actually, that was the first record I heard from him. It's one of the first jazz records that I ever really got into, jazz guitar records, and also immediately one that I ended up learning solos from, or at least trying to learn solos from. I don't know how much I actually got right. I mean, I think he's mostly famous for his long, flowing eighth note lines, very complex harmony, lots of bop material. He has pretty much his own theory on how to understand music and how to think about harmony. And amazing player, definitely. I think for him, my personal favorite is his debut album, El Hombre, and also a track that I think a lot of people checked out, because I'm not the only one who wanted to learn that one, was his solo on Just Friends.
Next up is a definite personal favorite of mine for many levels, because not only is he a beautiful guitar player, he's an incredible singer and incredible writer, Mr. George Benson.
Yeah, of course. Another one that's like actually completely following in the footsteps of Wes Montgomery, manages to cross over into pop music and also at the same time being an amazing, really incredible, intuitive and fascinating technical jazz guitar player. It's completely amazing how beautiful he sounds, not only when he's playing, but also when he sings.
And the fact that he has that connection between his voice and his fingers, where he can just be ba-do, ba-boo, ba-do. He can sing and play and scat along, and it's just beautiful.
Yeah, definitely amazing. I think actually for me, of course, being a jazz guitar player, I think I was always mostly attracted to sort of the period where he's doing more playing and less singing. And actually, like, I think my favorite jazz blues ever is his recording of Billy's Bounce. That's just really amazing. Him with Herbie Hancock on piano, and really sort of the connection between the two when they do chase also. So there's a lot of interaction happening, and that's amazing. Well worth checking out.
I remember when I first started to try and learn to play some George Benson, I feel like he uses the third position pentatonic minor in the first position, which is really, really, so what he does, he plays a 9 instead of a minor third over it. And you put that over the chord and it instantly feels like George Benson. I absolutely love his playing. So he's playing a root 9, 7, 5. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's just, oh.
I think actually for me, what the more that I've listened to him, and also now that in the beginning I was just amazed at the playing, and then I was just trying to learn what he was playing, and I didn't really think too much about what was going on. I think now later, also now that I've started to make videos on his playing and analyze it a little bit more, then I find that he's actually, in the same way as somebody like Charlie Parker is a very sort of intuitive but very skilled musician. So you have this, this is going to sound maybe a bit far, but it's kind of like a Mozart thing where you have these people who are just really, really talented, but they're not really super analytical about how they do it, but they just manage to get sort of pretty much everything right when they play, and that's so amazing.
This one, as excited as I am about George Benson, this next person is not only one of this is an understatement. He's one of my favorite guitar players of any genre. His book, Joe Pass, Guitar Style, was like a Bible to me as a teenager. And my father used to play albums of him and Ella Fitzgerald together, which still, anybody, just go and listen to it. Just a single guitar player with Ella Fitzgerald. All my hairs are standing on end. I don't know if it gets any better for me than Joe Pass.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, Joe Pass is really sort of the big guitar player for the hard bop era after Wes. And indeed, the Guitar Style book is also just the book that everybody learned to play from. You will hear people recommend that if you talk to Scofield, if you talk to Mike Stern. There are all these players, and if they are recommending books to you, it's quite likely that's going to be the book that they talk about. I've heard interviews where they're recommending that book, and I mean, his playing is a Bible in bebop lines, and his ability on the guitar in terms of just being, as you say, being a complete orchestra by himself is really unparalleled.
So do you have a favorite Joe Pass album?
Yeah, I do. I have one trio album that he recorded actually pretty late. It's in the 70s called Intercontinental, where there's really amazing playing. And weirdly enough, he's actually playing with people who you would normally consider ECM players, which is more like open modern jazz, but it's a great swinging album. Among other things, there's a track called Joe's Blues that's amazing. Really, that's where you hear this mix of bebop and blues that's just fantastic. I don't know, there's just something about especially that mix that's just really fantastic to me.
We're getting into, I suppose, more of a modern era here with Mr. John Scofield.
Yeah, so Scofield is by now hard to get around because I think he's actually also just a huge influence on jazz as a whole. And he has a long career, starting kind of with Miles Davis, being the guitar player of Miles Davis in the 80s. Actually, for me, when I started listening to jazz, it was Scofield and it was Parker. Also Charlie Parker, and that's because they're both really, really good at also playing blues. So there was kind of something that I could hang on to or understand, and then there was some stuff in between that I didn't really get. And immediately with Scofield, just the way that he can work with playing really behind the beat, playing really sort of bluesy phrases, having a very modern sound also. that's just something that's definitely really well worth checking out. I think for me, especially the period which was also around the time when I started playing jazz in the late 90s, where he was playing quartet with Joe Lovano and different rhythm sections. That's really sort of my favorite period for Scofield. There's also an album with Joe Henderson that's amazing, and that's pretty standard jazz for him because he's done so many things, and there are all sorts of funk and drum and bass and fusion and all sorts of stuff that he's been doing. But I think that area is really where I really live with him, and I still to this day active, playing, amazing, well worth checking out.
So talking of modern players, you probably can't get more modern sounding than Mr. Pat Metheny.
Well, yeah. So the funny thing was I saw an interview with Pat Metheny a few weeks ago where he was talking about how he was asked whether he considered himself a modern or a traditional player. And he actually made the argument that he was a traditional player because the way he learned was not in school. He didn't have an education really. So he was just learning on the street. But I mean, Metheny has been around since the 70s, and especially with his group, he's been playing original music from the beginning. It's always been sort of in between Latin, prog rock almost, and jazz, what he's been doing with the group. And at the same time, he's also done tons of other stuff with like classical music with Steve Reich and standard straight ahead jazz stuff and free jazz with Dewey Redman. So that there's a lot of stuff going on with him for sure.
The other thing, of course, about Pat Metheny is the Roland guitar synth.
Yeah, the one that you kind of have to, at least for me, it was like in the beginning, I couldn't really decide whether I hated it or I loved it because it's this old analog synth sound. But in the end, I must say that I really love when he plays that. And I think he never found one that worked better for him in that way. So he's still using it.
I don't know if you ever played one of those Roland guitars, the ones that's kind of a Les Paulish. It's a beautiful guitar. It's also a gorgeous guitar with a great neck and really well made. So it's kind of a win-win. It's a beautiful guitar with, a kind of interesting synthy trumpet sound that he had. But you're right, you come back to it and there's a certain like, oh, this is interesting. At the time, it's a little confusing, but now it's really cool.
But there's also, I mean, he was always trying to find new ways of getting new sounds. He's also, I think he's one of the first jazz guitar players, if not the first jazz guitar player, to have a wet, dry, wet rig, if that's a familiar term. So it's actually a quite extensive set of amplifiers on stage. He was also, what's that called, the synclavier, the sequencer. He was kind of like an expert, and when people were working with that, sometimes they would actually just call him in the middle of the night from some other continent to go like, well, how does this work? And what do you, and then he would know how to work with that. He's done a lot of film music with the synclavier together with Lionel Mays.
So next up, we have Kurt Rosenwinkel.
Yeah, so Kurt Rosenwinkel was, for me, somebody that I discovered just when I started studying at the conservatory. And in that way, he's been really influential to me because that was really a time when I was practicing really a lot and learning a lot of his music. So I pretty much learned most of his first album. And I think with him, you can hear Metheny, which we didn't really talk about, is a very melodic player. I think he's really sort of very directly melodic. Anybody will listen to that and say it's melodic most of the time. And the same goes for Kurt. Kurt also has these really strong melodies, but because he's also a piano player, he's also very strong, very rooted in a lot of bebop. So there are some modern sides to him, but there are also some very traditional sides to him. And you can hear how he's really has these very sort of strong, again, very intuitive player, very much listening to himself and his own voice, but still also managing to get some stuff where if you start listening to Bud Powell and Bill Evans and more older bop styles, you can still hear that tradition in there as well, maybe a little bit more than you'll hear the guitar players, which I always thought was kind of interesting. And I think the thing that I really started to admire with him, besides the melodies, was also that he's amazing at adding chords. He's comping himself and putting chords into his solo lines. So that's definitely something that kind of sets him apart compared to actually pretty much everybody before him.
And at number 10, by no means last or least, Mr. Gilad Hekselman.
Yeah, Gilad Hekselman is, I think, sort of coming out of the New York scene in the early 2000s. For me, he kind of was introduced by being the guitar player with Ari Hunik, a fantastic drummer. I think what I was mostly drawn to with him in the beginning was really all these rhythmical things that he's doing with Ari Hunik. The way they play together is really magical. I mean, I think there are some things now, it's the list of guitar players, but I think some of the things that for me has been really important for the people that I've listened to have been rhythm sections and how they work together. So not really a single person, but more the combination of a chord instrument, a bass player and a drummer. And I think with Gilad Hekselman and Ari Hunik and Joe Martin, you kind of have sort of this magical combination, similar to what you have with Miles Davis Quintet with Herbie Hancock, Ron Carter, and Tony Williams. So you kind of have all these things happening, a lot of adventure, a lot of freedom, pushing each other. And I mean, I will give you a link to some recordings of them playing together in Smalls in New York. It's amazing stuff, and all sorts of stuff is happening all the time.
Absolutely incredible. Jens, thank you ever so much for taking us through this journey. There is, of course, a whole bunch of links down below. There's a blog you can go to as well where you can check out more information on each player. Please check out Jens' channel, subscribe, check out all of his incredible tuition videos, and don't be afraid to leave a bunch of comments and questions below. I'll see if I can get Jens to answer them.
I'll show up and do my best. I usually do. Of course, with a list like this, because this is a 10 guitar players list, and it's difficult. Even when I was making it, I actually counted. I have 15 names that I kind of wanted to put in there. But but
maybe we should have made it 15.
Well, no, we should have made it 25 or 30, but it doesn't really make a ton of sense, So it gets too much. But I'm of course also curious, because you could let me know about that. If there's somebody who's not on the list, leave a comment on that, and then let us see who Warren needs to invite to interview. Maybe it's one that's still alive, then you can make a video with them.
Oh, there's so many players we love, of course, but as long as you had Joe Pass on there, I was happy. Thanks ever so much, Jens. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.